no antidote. There is no antidote.
To the Peculiar Book Club. We have a very exciting show for you tonight. This is the second of our double feature. Some of you I know are joining from our previous one last hour with Wendy Moore. But tonight we're doing something a little bit different for us. We're talking about science, and we're talking about fiction, and we're talking about the Book of Accidents with Chuck Wendig. And I know Davey's excited about this one.
I am absolutely excited about this one. I think this is going to be really unique and special for us because this one can kind of go all over the place, right? Chuck has had such an amazing career and written so many fantastic pieces that I'm really excited to see where this one goes.
Absolutely. And so, without further ado, allow me to introduce the fabulous Chuck Wendig. Yay!
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Your book has been an inspiring summer read. I was explaining to Chuck earlier today, for you other peculiars, I grew up in a small mining town, and so I wasn't sure if this was horror or just straight up history for me. The horror's so familiar.
Yeah.
So I'm so excited to have you here, partly because we don't normally do fiction, but for me, science is always influencing fiction, and fiction is always, believe it or not, influencing science. Which I've found that out in my own work. And so I'm really excited to hear you tell us a little bit about how those two things work together, as well as talking about the Book of Accidents. And I know we have a really excited crowd here tonight. We're going to be popping up some comments in the bottom just to let you know how people are thrilled to be here. I did put up the cocktail. Did you? I neglected, I think, to send you the recipe.
I saw on Twitter, though. Yeah.
Oh, you did? Okay, fantastic. So... thank you. I brought with me a little bit here, but I ran out of cherries. So mine's like whiskey without the dark waters. But I really enjoyed making this recipe because I thought something dark and syrupy on the bottom that you actually disturb in the drinking seemed like it was.
Perfect. I like it. Yeah.
So good. Cheers to all of you, all the folks out there drinking their drink. We do have a winner for naming the cocktail. And the choice that you had made, I think, was Rambling Rocks.
Yeah, the Rambling Rocks. That's a good. I mean, it's right out of the book, and with ice. I mean, it's good. I like it.
Yeah, it's brilliant. So those of you who, I know one of you actually sent that in to me. I'll be sending you an email later so you can win your fabulous swag. And as we get to the quiz with Davey later, I will announce the winners of the signed copy and also the peculiar earring set from the old operating theater. So don't rush off. We've got lots of things to share with you tonight. I am seeing several people talk about how excited they are, not just to talk about this book, but also Wanderers. And oof, that one.
Sorry about that one. A little close to reality. My bad.
No, but it does feel that way. And so, I kind of want to, I'm going to let the questions queue up. So you guys go ahead and type your questions in there for us right now in the chat feed. And let's just start off with, wow, what got you on Book of Accidents? What was the defining moment for you?
It's not so much that there's like one defining moment, but a series of cascading moments. I grew up in a haunted house, so I've always kind of wanted to write haunted house story. Whether you believe or don't believe, I grew up in something that resembled a haunted house. Obviously I grew up in a family in America, so we are haunted by generational trauma, as are many. So I wanted to dig into that. But also I live in this area, which is so pickled in not just history, but really weird folklore. And I'm a very greedy writer. And I thought, what if I just put all of that into one book? And I just sort of cram it in until it explodes. And that's the book.
That is a really good descriptor of how this all comes together for me personally, because actually I also grew up in a house that was underground next to a cemetery.
Yeah. So how is it underground? That's an important question to me. Like, how is it just?
Well, we lived, there were several other houses built on this high hill out in the middle of nowhere. I was actually in Ohio, not Pennsylvania, but I was close to the border in the Appalachian Mountains. And all the structures kept getting hit by lightning and burning down. So they decided they would just put a roof on the ground, essentially. So there was a roof on the ground and a door in the side of the hill. And that was where we lived. And the house or the basement, the hole wasn't haunted, but we did have very creepy things. Like my brother and I called the woods around our house, it was about 50 acres, the witch wood. Like we were convinced that that something was going on into these backwoods.
And you
it does sound like I grew up in a haunted house.
You grew up underground next to a cemetery, which is like you were a vampire, basically. You grew
I
up in a
have
vampire
quiet neighbors, you know? I mean, not a peep out of those guys. But much.
Yeah.
But I think that concept of trauma is really interesting. Actually, Kristen Meston says she was maybe a little bit traumatized by the book itself.
That's fair. That's fair. I tried to get you out of it by the end. I tried to nosedive and then you come back out of it.
But I think, one of the things that fascinates me about fiction in general is how often you have to bring in reality. So it sounds like there is a lot of reality in the book as we're working in and out with it.
Yeah, I'm always cautious. If it's going to be anything science related, obviously I want to try to get that as right as possible. If it's going to be something historical, I want to try to get that as right as possible.
Right.
Within reason, obviously, because everything's a fictional conceit. I always kind of say there's like my guideline is like, if there's going to be 3 points on a line forming that line, and it's based on history or science, I need 2 of those points or 3 of those points or as many points as I can get need to be real. And then only toward the end can you kind of start to move away from them. So everything feels like something that's familiar and understandable and rooted in a logic and how we experience the world. And then you take it off the rails. If it goes off the rails from the beginning, it's almost fantasy too much. And that's not bad, but it becomes a different thing. So I needed to feel real until you sort of twist the knife at the end of it. But Book of Accidents is definitely one of those things that's based not only in the area in which I live, but some of it comes out of my own life. But I was always cautious to try to, especially with the sort of the theme of the book, it's appropriate to it, that I'm always trying to slipstream it away. I'm always trying to how can I turn the gears and make this like an unrecognizable version of the reality in which I've experienced, so it's not biographical.
And it works so well. I mean, this is I'm putting up Lilith Daly's point here because it's true, right? I also follow you on Instagram and I check out your birding and your flowers and your bees and all of these things, and that too is a piece of. I mean, I feel the reality of the nature and the surroundings. I feel like I'm walking through that area when I read your book, and it's because you've been there. You're bringing that experience in with you.
Yep, that's the goal. Birds are one of those things I put in all my books, just because I'm also a lazy writer, so I put all the things that I like into books. Wanderers is very much that way. Like, people always ask me how much research I did for the book, and it's not that I didn't do research while writing it, but I had already built this iceberg of research on my own, just of things that I liked. It wasn't that I was trying to write a book about them. I just was obsessed with these things and anxious about these things and in love with some of these things and all of that kind of stuff. I formed a Voltron and put it into print. And so it wasn't that I did it afterward. I did it all before.
Voltron being one of my favorite comics from childhood, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Marissa asks, talks about how much she loves your humor. And I agree. Like, even in Book of Accidents, I mean, you have these moments which, I mean, maybe you're not supposed to laugh at them, but you have these moments of real raw humor that I think are really something. And that's necessary, I think, in a book like, well, in any book, but in the book like this one, especially, to cut against. But maybe that's part of your slipstream process. It
is. And it's, I think both from a storytelling perspective, horror is accentuated by both humor and heart. If you don't have those things, then the horror becomes a little relentless. And not to say that can't work, but for a 500-some page book, that's going to start to feel a little dire if everything is super serious and super dark and super upsetting, for all the time. So, my goal is to kind of do that whole light versus dark kind of thing. You can't really make out the dark, and you can't see the shadows if you don't have a bright light to shine them. So all my books try to be and I think it's fun to be funny. I don't think I ever want to write a book that feels overly soul crushingly serious. That's like Cormac McCarthy's The Road. Beautiful book, great book, but not what you would call a fun book in any way. Like, not even one page of it. You're like, that was a good one. There's none of that. You're just like,
it's true. I have to say, Book of Accidents can still be a beach read, I think. In fact, maybe you want it to be bright light, many escape routes. I'm not sure.
Probably.
But you're right. The road is it's oppressive almost, and I think that's the point. So I'm not necessarily complaining about it.
Right.
But for me, I find your works much more enjoyable than that. The Wanderers, particularly, well, actually, I thought The Wanderers was more fun before it looked so much like reality.
Sorry about that one again. Apologies.
We didn't know we were going in that direction.
No,
it's like Idiocracy.
Yeah, you talk about writing. Like, is it writing science or writing fiction? Like, I thought it was fiction, and then it turns out it was more of the other thing.
I think this is an interesting question from Kristen. Does horror lose some of its bite when it's too real? Or does it have more bite if it's particularly real? That's a good question. How would you answer that?
I don't know. I mean, it really all depends on its presentation. I mean, reality can be pretty horrific, as we're all noticing sometimes. As we're like, hey, what's on Twitter today? And then an hour later, you're just like, oh, and you're twitching like a little chihuahua. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it can still serve a horrific purpose to pinpoint reality, or at least to cleave to some of it. And again, it kind of goes back to that thing where I don't mind using a little reality and mind kind of going down the path of reality to drive home some of the weirder, more horrific elements. Maybe that makes it better in some cases, or more believable. Yeah.
Well, and I personally, for me, even though I love science fiction, but I tend to like science fiction that makes me feel very grounded. Yeah. And I'll use Star Wars as an example. I actually lived in Arizona for a time as a young child. So some of my earliest memories are of sand. Just so when I see Star Wars, it's Tatooine, I just feel very much like, yeah, this is. So there's a sense in which the familiar, I think, really grounds you, and you're like, yeah, they're wearing clothes and stuff, and it's real, and it's dirty, and it's analog, and it just feels like it's part of you.
Yeah, Star Wars works so well when it looks lived in and roughed up. Not when it's too CGI, glitzy, glammy, because it starts to, on one hand, that maybe feels a little more sci-fi, but that can separate you from that experience and maybe kind of put you at a distance. I mean, of course, there's the question: is Star Wars really even sci-fi in the first place? But that's really a whole show. That's a whole show.
There's like books written about that.
Books.
Speaking of that closeness of reality and fiction, Invasive, which I also have from you. Thank you very much for sending that along. That's a peculiar book because I know science. I'm a science historian, and even I'm going, is this a real thing or is this a Chuck thing?
That's good. That's the dream, really, is that you don't know the real thing. Yeah, I did some cool ant research. I was actually at a convention called Gen Con, which is a gaming convention in Indianapolis. And out there was the Gwen Pearson ran and runs, to my understanding, still the Purdue University Bug Barn, which is a big entomology program out there. So she was like, if you can stuff as many authors as you can find into this van, which is usually a terrifying prospect, but in this case, it's great. He's like, I will drive you to the university and we can research bugs all day. I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. And I could convince alarmingly few authors to go. So, but I did get a handful. It was like, I think Stephen Blackmore, Delilah Dawson, and Max Gladstone.
Stephen Blackmore, yes, he's lovely.
Yeah. So we went out there and sure enough, we got to handle spiders and look at all kinds of wonderful bugs. But then the ants were fascinating because they had you walked into their ant room and I don't know, you sort of envision there's going to be all these tunnels and I'm going to see all these ants. And it looks like there's racks and dish pans, white, tubs. And they just pull them out and they're greased along the edges and there's just full of ants. Here's an ant colony. It's just a tub of ants. And you put it back, here's a different kind of ant. Do you want to see this ant? And it was fascinating. And so you could see how they reacted to different things. And
wow. How they react to being pulled out of their tubs. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Another one of those things about living underground for a period of time is just how many bugs I met and spiders.
For sure. Yeah, they probably came right in, didn't they?
They did. Well, because I was in their home. I mean, technically, they live in the ground. I was totally an interloper. But we did have a black snake that lived in the roof. So she had the penthouse, essentially, upstairs. And we named her Black Snake because we were creative. And she just would have babies in the spring, and they would come down the walls in the bathroom. And so you'd just be sitting on the toilet, and they would just be like, hello, hi. So
that's kind of amazing.
That's why I said Book of Accidents is. I didn't realize it was horror at first.
No, it's just your life. You're like, this is normal to me. Yeah.
This is funny. It's true. I follow your Twitter. If you guys don't follow Chuck on Twitter, I'm sorry for you because you're missing a lot of good stuff.
If you do follow me. I also feel bad for the people who do follow me. Like, I tweet too much, and it's.
But this is a great question. How do you view social media's role in what you do? I know it's a big part of what I do.
It's interesting because it's changed over the years. Again, it's a topic that could do a whole show about. Initially when I first started writing, I think it was viewed by publishers as kind of a thing you do to sell books. I think over time, we've all kind of become disabused of that notion. And it's not to say you can't sell 10 copies and 100 copies or whatever of books. You can, and that's certainly, you should definitely try to sell some books via Twitter. But you really don't, like, publishers want thousands of books sold, not just a few you can hand sell on Twitter. So Twitter is a great place to connect, not just with readers, but other writers and publishers,
Absolutely.
obviously scientists and people who, are in the kinds of things you want to write about and the disciplines that you're interested in. And so that for me is the place where Twitter becomes a magical, wonderful realm. It can also go the other side as your platform gets bigger and you start to realize you're no longer at the water cooler, you're on a stage, and then you realize you're not even on the stage anymore. You're in an arena and everybody's coming for you. So it's a little weird, but
I'm still at the water cooler stage myself, pretty much. I think I've only got
about so much nicer. It's a much better stage.
But you're right. I've met some awesome people. I mean, the Peculiars. Wave to all of them out there who are here tonight. The Peculiar Book Club is basically built of folks who. It's hard to find these kinds of groups in your native environment sometimes, and so instead we built this much bigger space. And we've had people on from Carl Zimmer to Mary Roach. And so not people you would normally think of as inhabiting in the same space. And yet it makes sense partly.
It makes sense. No, it makes sense to me.
Yeah, of the Twitter world. Oops, we just got 3 questions in a row. Let's see.
Ooh. Yeah, let's do it.
Oh, yes, you've got a middle grade fiction book coming out soon. I saw that too.
Yeah, Dustin Grimm. It's about a girl who inherits a funeral home for monsters, and she has to share that inheritance with a brother she's never met. So,
nice.
I don't know. Why did I write it? First of all, I have a son, and he's entering the middle grade realm. And I timed it very well that he's actually, for once, interested in a book that I'm writing. So even Star Wars, he was like, he was interested, and he's a huge Star Wars fan, but he was interested in that I knew other writers that wrote Star Wars. He's like, can you give me their books? I was like, no, but I wrote these books. And he's like, no. Sorry, who are you? And this one he's really interested to read, so I'm very happy about that.
That's cool.
And then it's also sort of a weird companion piece in some ways to Book of Accidents, set in Pennsylvania, and there's monsters and cemeteries and all kinds of stuff.
There are.
Yeah.
In Pennsylvania. There are
in
monsters.
Pennsylvania. It's just how we are.
I've got a book set in a coal mine in Pennsylvania, and so there's some monsters in there.
It's for real.
I love that though. I'm looking forward to it. I also love the title. Dustin Grimm just sounds so lovely.
Thank you. That's the goal.
One person said, kudos on a horror masterpiece. The book is positively seismic.
Thanks,
and
Mike.
That's Mike. And Lilith agrees that Twitter is itself perhaps a bit like horror.
It is. It can be horror. It's a horror novel unfolding every day.
Every day.
Every day.
What's that like, writing scary for kids? And that's, my very first introduction to books was the John Belair series, so House with the Clock in its Walls and all of those. And so I loved those, but I've never tried to write one.
It was new for me, but also I don't feel like it felt odd because, as you noted with the Book of Accidents, I'm not attempting to write this sort of bleak, unyielding, everybody dies at the end kind of book. I feel like I want to write something that has a whiff of the Spielberg about them, that kind of sense of again, hope, heart, humor, really rooted in the horror stuff. So, I think writing for kids, I think that's a little even more essential. Not just for a beach read component, but I'm not super keen on writing a dark, sad book for kids. Hey kids, let's tell the parents you got to get some therapy bills. Let me write you a book. Ooh.
But speaking of therapy, though, that is a question I have. So, confession, I'm in the middle of working on a thriller/horror book about where I grew up, for reasons you now maybe all know.
Yeah.
And I'm finding it. I think I thought it would be therapeutic. I think it's mostly not. I find myself quite weirdly dissociated from the things that I'm writing about, even though I lived through them. And so you were saying how you pull in things that are part of you and part of your. Do you find that same? It's almost. I feel like I'm watching myself. I'm not really quite.
Yeah, I didn't find it therapeutic in the truest sense. Like I didn't find like it was a great release. In part because I wasn't aiming for it to be. Like I wasn't trying to be like, let's really work through some personal stuff. Like,
Right.
I feel like I've worked through that. I mean, as much as we can all work through things, which is not entirely. But I was definitely not. I don't want people to read my therapy sessions. I mean, it's in there, but like I don't want you to have to go on that ride with me.
Right. I just don't think I thought reapproaching that narrative would actually, but it doesn't because I'm writing it. Yeah, I think it's different when I read your book. I'm like, oh, so impacted.
Yeah, and when I read yours, I'll probably be like, hey.
Who knows me? That's not fair. My brother and I had the same therapist for a while, and so she knows a lot about my family.
The therapist is like, I got all the deets. I got all of them.
No, she was more like, you guys need to stop coming.
You two need to talk. That's usually how that goes, right? Like, you know things that the other one doesn't know. And
yeah. Wayward promises to be the same. What does the editing process look like on such monsters?
Wanderers was 280,000 words, and then I just finished the sequel, and the first draft topped out at just shy of 280,000 words. So, also, I'm sorry. Just very big books, and they're bison bludgeon as a book. So, editing is different. Every book is different. I don't know. Wanderers was not that hard. It was mostly like we didn't do any big changes. I had some things at the beginning. It was like almost like setting your feet right on a journey. Like I had some things at the beginning that needed to happen to cascade the story better. But otherwise it was mostly a lot of like just scissor things, a little stitching. It was like just really trying to tighten and tighten and tighten. But at the end, it actually gained words rather than losing them. So tightening them wasn't about losing anything. It was just about making it all work. Book of Accidents was a whole different sort of it was one of those things where it was like the first draft was a lump of unrefined mess, and it was made in the edit. It was all about like shaping. Like the editor and I joked that it felt like rewiring capillaries and sinew. Like it wasn't just. It's easy when it's like cut this limb off. This limb is cancerous. You need to lose the arm, and then we can move on with our day. That's easy when that happens because then you just burn it shut and you move on your day. This was just a lot of like breaking a chapter up into a few pieces or moving this little part here, moving this little part there, and making this character get punched up a little more. It was never anything big, but it was a lot of little things that had to be done.
Yeah. I feel like I can never actually work out. I can't even tell you why one book will be like that and another one won't.
Yeah. It's because they're all different.
Yeah, they are.
I don't want them to be different.
It's like having kids. People are like, which is your favorite? And you're like, oh, it's a terrible question.
The worst question.
This is Mike Breen. I popped in late. What real world horror scares you the most currently? Oh, that's a good one.
That, believe it or not, was the core of writing Wanderers. I sort of took all of my anxieties about all of the things that freaked me out, whether we're talking obviously the political situation in the country with the rise of white supremacy at that time, and still everywhere. Yeah, and then it was like post-antibiotic age and climate change and rampant artificial intelligence and obviously pandemics. And I was like, again, I'm a sort of both a greedy and a lazy writer. I'm like, what if I just take all of this stuff and I just stuff the snakes back in the can, and this is the book. I want all of those things to happen in one book and work together in a really weird way. And so those are all currently still the things I'm freaked out about. I thought Wanderers made me feel a little better about them, and then reality continued to be reality.
And then reality made it worse.
Yeah, I didn't fix anything.
Yeah, Murder Hornets. Yeah,
Murder Hornets. Yeah, Murder Hornets. I think that's fine. We'll be fine.
I think I'm less worried about Murder Hornets. I'm more worried about like Murder Bears or something. I need something a little bit bigger. That's more upsetting.
Yeah, drop bears.
What inspired in Book of Accidents to enter the story on death row?
That's one of those changes that was interesting in the second draft, because initially it started off with the prologue with the man walking and finding a child coming out of a coal mine and with a pickaxe. So, but then throughout the story, because like the book kind of plays with, again, history and folklore and stuff that had happened in the past and is maybe recycling to now. The serial killer character, Edmund Reese, was just a reference in the story. Brought up a lot, but like he was a historical note. This thing happened and then he died. But then it was like, what if he was a presence in the story, like a literal actual presence in the story? And so initially it was like, well, I could introduce him as a prologue, but I already have a prologue. And I was like, you're not supposed to do any prologues. But they didn't say anything about doing two. So I put 2 prologues in the book instead of none. And
well, maybe they cancel each other out. It's like 2 rights make a wrong, or 2 wrongs make a right.
Go with that. Well, it's writing advice.
Yeah, you guys are getting a lot of writing advice tonight. So I have a question for you, which is, so I tend to write genre fiction myself, but I write mystery. And so thriller is the closest I ever really get to horror or things like that.
Sure.
But science fiction as a genre, I mean, how do you find it? Because your science fiction, we were just talking about this with Star Wars. For anybody who's a little bit late, we were talking about how Star Wars has a gritty, lived-in feeling that's a little bit connected to, feels connected to reality. Your science fiction strikes me this way too. Like, I feel like these are all places that we could all be living in. They just skirt that edge of where we're really at. And some people consider that science fiction, and some people consider that really just literature. And I mean, where's that line? Yeah,
and some people would call it speculative fiction as opposed to science fiction. I don't know that there's a line. This is like it's unfortunate, but I mean, maybe it's not unfortunate. But genre is just a thing we all made up. Like, it's not a real thing. It's just a place where they put the books in the bookstores and the libraries so people know the kinds of things they're going to get. It's like a marketing decision, and that it's not a bad marketing decision. And certainly they start to come with narrative tropes to, sort of reinforce them. But I think, if your book contains some science and some fiction, it's usually a pretty good sign that you wrote science fiction, whether it's one of those subgenres that are crunchier in terms of hard sci-fi or slipstream or whatever it should be. I think there's a lot of variables there to play with, but I think science fiction should be a pretty big tent.
Yeah. What's your favorite? Like, who inspires you? Who do you read?
I mean, now or like when I was a kid? Because I mean, now I have so many. Now, I just read The Annual Migration of Clouds by Premi Mohammed, which is, I mean, I would argue science fiction, but it's a post-climate change world, and a young woman is accepted into a sort of forbidden university, but she also has kind of this weird, vaguely sentient fungal pathogen inside her body. And you can see it in her eyes, and it's a smart pathogen. It doesn't want you to get hurt, so it protects itself. It's fascinating. And it's kind of it's a novella. It's actually not a full novel, so it's much shorter than Wanderers. But it's a really sweet, strange little story, and I loved it a whole lot. Yeah.
Well, the most recent book I read of fiction was Invasive. So really great author. You'd love that guy.
Yeah, I've heard bad things.
Sarah
on Twitter, I don't enjoy it.
Says genre is just a snobbish distinction between literature and popular fiction. That's a possibility too. Evan Thompson, how different is it to writing for an established world franchise like Star Wars compared to building your own world in other books? It's obviously very different in that I have no masters to answer to when it comes to writing my own work. Star Wars has obviously a number of sort of layers obfuscation there in terms of both publisher has an input, and then Lucasfilm has an input, and then inevitably Disney has an input, and there's probably some sort of distant elder gods who have some input there that I'm not aware of yet. Probably a sentient pathogen somewhere in Disney.
Or just a mouse, some giant space mouse. I don't know. So, you kind of have to do a little more planning up front. Like, for the writers who are always like, well, I don't like to outline, unfortunately for kind of work for hire or licensed material, not that my Star Wars work was licensed, not work for hire, but, you have to give them an outline. You have to show them what you're going to try to write. Whereas when it's your own work, you can kind of take off running and do whatever you want. And then the advantages to each in terms of once the books are out there. Like if you're writing in a pre-existing world, pre-existing story, a licensed thing, you are kind of jumping on board that pre-existing audience.
Right.
Most of those people don't really transfer over to your original fiction. A lot of those people, you'll get a few. I mean, I certainly have a lot of people who started with Star Wars and then did move to something like Wanderers. But on the other side, you know, if it's your own work, even if it's not a book that had a huge advance or didn't sell like mega numbers, that those books can still be lucrative in the long tail. My first novel, Blackbirds, I think is, despite everything, one of my most lucrative books, just because it continues to keep on going. Like we keep selling film and TV rights. We keep selling foreign periodically. We get foreign royalties periodically. Just like it's just weird little kind of washes up on my beach, and it's just sort of continues to pay me randomly out of nowhere.
Being able to have a pre-existing audience is something that, well, I've not experienced it myself. And I normally write nonfiction, and so I write fiction too. And I find that those are two very different worlds. Like they don't talk to each other particularly well. Though I feel like you peculiars, you guys would cross. I feel like you would. But yeah, it's definitely it's an unusual thing. Lilith asks about Miriam, and I like Miriam Black too. I know it's going back a bit, but her sheer badassness inspired me. Where did she come from for you?
Miriam is like, she's one of those like characters. I mean, so here's the thing. Like, I have wanted to be a novelist for most of my life, and I wrote a bunch of very bad books to get to the point where I realized I was writing books that, and these are never published, thankfully, thank all the gods, never reached anybody's eyeballs. I was writing books that were trying to chase like a market or trying to ape another author's voice. It was really not my own thing. But I was sort of frustrated, and I decided I was going to write a book that was kind of mine. And it was going to be a book that I didn't care if it got published. It would break rules. I wrote it in present tense, and it was a third person and an unlikable protagonist. And it starts with her looking in a mirror, which is another, don't ever do that.
Another no-no they tell you not to do.
Another no-no, don't ever have that happen. So I was like, I'm doing it. I don't care. I'm doing all of those things because what does it matter? Like, I don't think it's ever going to get published anyway. And at the time, I was sort of coming to that blunt, naive, obvious, and yet still important realization that, like, people around me are now dying, and then I'm going to die eventually. Like, just, you know it, but also you don't necessarily know it until you know it. And so Miriam Black was sort of like a weird power fantasy about someone who can see those threads, who can kind of keyed into fate versus free will, but she doesn't have a lot of ability to change it. I didn't want it to be easy. I didn't want it to be fun for her. Like, I wanted death to have its weight and bearing in terms of fatalism. So she sort of came out of both my frustration with myself and also the realities of our mortalities. And so that first book took me like 5 years to write, and then the second book took me 30 days.
3 days.
30 days.
30 days. Oh, well, 6 days
different.
apparently for Lilith to read all of them. So.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
Yeah. That is one of the frustrating things. Like, I spend up to 18 months writing my nonfiction. So Mr. Humble and Dr. Butcher took 18 months, trips to Moscow. I was in a lot of weird basements. And then I had I gave it to my mother, and she's like, I read it in 2 days. And I was like, slow down. A lot of work went into that.
It's favorite. You just wolfed down the meal.
Yeah.
By the way, I was in a lot of weird basements. I feel like is a good memoir name if you ever need one. Given where you grew up, I was in a lot of weird
Many basements. I was in a lot of weird basements. Yeah. At least my growing up basement had the snake and bugs and the raccoon. So that was my
raccoon.
pet. Yeah.
Oh, you had a pet raccoon?
Yeah. I wouldn't recommend it.
Oh, no. I was attacked by my aunt's pet raccoon.
Yeah. No, she slept in my bed. And I wouldn't recommend that either, actually, because they're not terribly well house trained. But anyway, I should just write nonfiction, right? I don't need fiction.
Yes. No. You just write this. Write it all down.
So, we got another pet. Yeah. Well, I mean, she was very small. Her mother had been hit by a car, and I raised her, and I did reintroduce her to the wild eventually. And she went away for about a year, and she came back with all her kittens, so I got to meet them, and I felt like a grandmom, I guess. And so that was the story of the
raccoon grandmother.
A grand raccoon. I was a great raccoon.
Yeah.
I thought this was kind of an interesting question. Lilith is carrying the day here, but she says that have you done? Oh wait, no, we skipped way ahead. Sorry. Will you ever resurrect your book corpses, revisiting the bad stuff? And I think that's a really good question. Now I'm going to get back to Sarah's question.
Ooh,
here.
yeah. Book of Accidents is a resurrection. I tried writing this book twice before. I tried writing it once about 10 years ago and once about 20. And
wow.
Yeah, that first time was not a good go. Though I reread them both recently, or not reread them, but I looked at them both recently. And the first one was recognizable to what the book became. Like, it's very different, but has the coal mine and bullies and has some kind of key touchstone components. The second time I tried it, I was like flipping through it and I remembered none of it. I feel like I don't remember the characters' names. I didn't know who they. I felt like I fugued out and had like, and I only got about 70,000 words in it. I couldn't finish it the second time, and I was like, wow, boy, that. Like, what happened to my brain that I literally don't even remember doing this? But
yeah, no, that's but don't you think that it's all still living in your brain, right? It's all still kind of there.
Yep.
Oh, Sarah asks, you talk about vibrations at Ramble Rock, and she lives in New Zealand, and they have the black sand beach because it's vibrations.
Oh, does it actually vibrate? Like, does it actually make a sound?
That's a good question.
Or does it like move?
She added, I lost her. Metaphysical.
She's gone. The black sand took her.
Yours is a two-part question. What is your second part there? Wait, Sarah, you'll have to add in. Does it actually vibrate?
Yeah, we want to know. We have questions for you.
We
Sarah.
have questions.
Ramble Rocks is based on a local place called Ringing Rocks.
Oh, nice.
About half an hour north of where I am right now. And I just went up there on the day of the book's release, and I took pictures up there with the book. And part of the trick is the rocks don't move; they ring. If you find the right rocks and you hit it with a hammer, they're supposed to ring. I had been there as a kid, never heard it, and I never met anyone who actually heard it. I'm literally standing there, and there's like a pack of kids near me, and one of them is just making it ring like a bell. I was like, I'm like, you're right there. I never could do this, and this kid is nailing it. Like, damn.
Oh, that's so funny. It does record low vibrations, but lower than human hearing. Might not be lower than mine. I've got, or no, I guess I hear the high pitch. Did you know the things only cats are supposed to hear? I got one of those cat scram devices. It chases me out of the room. Cat's fine with it. I can't stand it.
You've switched brains.
So, and I know you live in Pennsylvania, and I live in Ohio. I'm actually up in Cleveland now, which is quite urban. But and I went here on purpose because it's urban. But where I grew up is, I think, not dissimilar from the areas you're in. And one of the things that I do miss is there were so many more. It's funny that we call them urban legends, but like legends, there's a lot more legends in the country. We have all kinds of strange stories about things and places you shouldn't go, and all that stuff. Do you find that that's true of your area as well?
Oh yeah, everywhere. Like even just the place where I grew up, we had I grew up at the base of a thing called Buckingham Mountain. Not a mountain, but we called it a mountain because I guess we had
Spring Mountain.
Yeah. So it's just a big, prodigious hill, but it's a hill that takes some time to get over. So, just on that hill alone, we had wolf rocks and a cave with secret treasure and the quote-unquote devil church, which is a super racist thing. Once you looked into it, it was like, oh, it's actually an African-American church that was part of the Underground Railroad, but all the local jerks just called it the devil church because you're like, sure, okay. You had the Gravity Hill, which is, the car gets pushed up the hill by mysterious children's ghost hands. And then just even 5 minutes down the road from there you had to go down this gravel path and you turned off your lights and you yelled, "Fritz, come out and play." And then a boy who lost his head would come out. And it was a ghost light scenario, and he was the light was his head or a lantern. It was and that's just within 5 minutes of my house growing up. Everywhere you go, you would have these sort of hyper local folklore bubbles that sort of didn't exist anywhere else, but they did right there.
It's so funny because we had this story of and again, super racist, not good stuff. There's always a crazy woman. There's always some crazy woman, crazy Mary, crazy Susan, doesn't matter. It's crazy somebody. And you would hear all of these tales about that. and that their ghost would haunt. But of course, a lot of these places were weird, and they were weird even for the indigenous people that were there before us. So they have stories about it being weird. I'm like, maybe it's just weird here. Like,
Yeah,
this is just a weird place.
You guys notice it's just strange here. Yeah. Maybe they vibrated with that low
frequency.
Like sand, yeah.
I'm worried. I feel like maybe we should let them know. So Chuck and I are actually the same person. We're doing something really, special to make us appear in two different places at one time.
Eventually merge.
Yeah, it's the same person. Though I did one of my shows with Lindsay Fitzharris. She had the same bookshelf, so it actually looked like that was a lot. And we were dressed the same that day as well. So I know we've traveled a little bit far afield from the Book of Accidents, which was an accident. But I really love how you make horror seem familiar. That didn't come out right. Make the familiar seem horrible? I'm not sure.
Either or. We can go either or. Yeah, both are good.
It's really lovely. It really works out well. We got another question from Sarah here. Says, do you have medical conditions that you file away for your work, or do you write them and then find out they're real?
Oh yeah. No, I'm usually aware, like things like the prion and the botfly stuff. Yeah, no, I'm always sort of like you just like study these things. You're like, that's weird and gross. I want to.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm a nonfiction writer who came up with enough weird nonfiction that I thought, well, no one will believe that's nonfiction. I'll have to write a fictional book about that.
Yeah.
Yep. There's a lot of strange things about bodies and stuff. I have loads more I want to talk to you about, but we're going to take a quick break. We're going to bring on Davey for his quiz, and also I want to announce the winners. So hopefully the winners are here tonight. If not, I'll get in touch with you later. But we have, for the signed book of Accidents, we have Pamela Morgan. Pamela Morgan, are you with us this evening? Because you are our winner of the signed book. And for the Blue Bottle earrings, which go with the theme song of Peculiar Book Club, we have Tori Trent. Tori Trent is our winner tonight. These are ticketed folks, so I'm assuming they're here someplace. I'm just not sure where. You can say so in the comments. You can get in touch with me, or I will email you after the show. Congratulations, and we will be sending you your swag. And Davey, take it away.
Well, thank you. Yeah, this has been a great conversation. I'm loving how it's touched so many different areas, and we got a little Star Wars in there too. I got my Star Wars Legos over my shoulder here, so I'm all set for that. But yeah, so I mean, your book is fiction, so I couldn't really go into the fictional world too much. Normally, I look at other science fiction themes and stuff like that, but I do have a quiz prepared for you. So we like to quiz all our authors here.
Uh-oh.
I feel like maybe you would consider the inciting incident of the Book of Accidents that dying wish from Nate's father, sort of, or maybe it's not even a dying wish, but a dying request.
Oh, an offer, kind of, yeah.
Yeah. So I decided to look at other. I'm calling this quiz, and here it comes: dying demands.
Gosh.
So let's see if you can guess the dying demand here. So I got 3 questions for you. Organic chemist and part-time inventor Frederick Bauer wished to be buried with his greatest invention, which was Pringles, combos, or Cheetos.
Oh man, I actually feel like I've heard the answer to this. I'm gonna default lazily to Pringles because I like to imagine the man with the fancy mustache is a Frederick Bauer, and I will call him that from now on.
It was Pringles. In fact, he invented the can and the shape of the potato chip, to fit in it. And in the article, they did say that most of his ashes were placed in an urn, but some of his ashes were placed in a Pringle can and placed, together.
And we've all been eating them since.
I like the idea that he was just in a coffin full of crispy things. Like, you imagine like carrying that to the crunch. Did you crispy? I'm hungry.
Like, this is what a snacky, fun time this is.
All right, question number 2. This famous novelist left instructions that no monument or memorial be erected after their death. Was it Jane Austen, George Orwell, or Charles Dickens?
I can sort of believe it of any of them. I'm going to go lazy again to Jane Austen. Just to, I don't know.
It was actually Charles Dickens.
Was it Charles Dickens?
Yeah,
That's interesting.
yeah.
Oh,
He was the one I was not sure about. I was like, you know what? Because he was such a popular author.
you know
I
what?
felt-
Honestly, we shouldn't have said Jane Austen because nobody made statues of women.
Exactly.
Who would have had that?
He just wanted his works to stand for himself, and eventually, though, the family did relent, and in his hometown there is a statue of him now. I think they felt after 150 years, they felt he wouldn't realize what his works would mean to to civilization, and so they felt at this point it was okay if they do that.
That's why I love James Joyce, because he was like, he hated Ireland. Was like, I'm going to be buried in France. I don't want to be. And then they're like, we love him. He's our national treasure. And he's like, whirling about.
All right. Question number 3, final question. This comedian, and this is nice because normally everything is so macabre, but I get to end on a happy note here. This comedian was quite the romantic and made provisions that upon his death, a single red rose would be delivered to his wife every day. Was it Jack Benny, Jerry Lewis, or Jackie Gleason?
Oh man, that's a good one. I'm woefully unfamiliar with Jack Benny, so I'll just say Jack Benny because it's probably is it?
You are correct. It's Jack Benny. Yeah. And I think his wife outlived him by about 8 years, and the florist did stick with it and delivered a rose to her every day.
Aw.
Wow.
That's kind of awesome.
Great
Yes.
job. Great job on our quiz there. I mean, I wasn't sure where I was going to go as I started reading the Book of Accidents. I'm like, where am I going to go with the quiz this week? And,
Coal mine disasters. No.
Mike Breen says, total humble brag on Dickens' part. I know you're going to want to build monuments of me.
It really
but... Evan says, that was a heck of a Florence bill. And Kristen says, that was a great quiz. It was. That was a really fun
Thank you,
quiz.
Kristen.
Well done, Davey. Davey, you know what? You're normally in the backstage, but today's your day, man, because Chuck is all into sci-fi, and I know you are too. Do you have questions?
I did have a Star Wars question for him. So obviously you came into the Star Wars universe at a almost, maybe say a tumultuous time. And there had been so many works that had come through the 80s and 90s, and Star Wars announced that all of those were now pushed into Legends. And here is this new author with a new story. I mean, it had to have felt like, to use a sports analogy, had to have felt like a backup quarterback coming in to play the Super Bowl.
It was weird, though it didn't. It was because had this. They moved a whole bunch to Legends, but they still had this sort of like interstitial books like Darth Plagueis and A New Dawn and things that did come before Aftermath that were still probably canon, and most of them have remained canon, but some of them have not. So it was sort of already a weird time in terms of what they were gonna do going forward. But I get a lot of questions too that are like, are you going to be mad when they do that to yours? Like, I don't know. I got to write Star Wars. I can't be. Whatever happens. I don't control that. That's on them.
Yeah, but you did create one of my favorite characters. I love the Marshal.
Oh, the Marshal. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And then seeing the character appear now in television, that probably was exciting.
With such good hair.
He's such good hair. Well, he's also sort of who I envisioned for the role.
Really? That's so funny.
He's sort of because I really enjoyed obviously Justified, so it tracked. It's weird to see him in there because I'm not really supposed to be writing Star Wars anymore, and then also like I know I get nothing for this. Like they get the purchase they want, and I'm just like, hey, it's him. That's really exciting, but I could use any. Why don't you send me some toys? Like you don't need to pay me. Just send me a couple toys. Any toys. A shirt, a t-shirt. No t-shirt.
That's awesome. I think that I would just be like, we watched the making of it, and my partner, who was Thing a minute ago, he's an engineer, and so we were watching the making of it, and they were building stuff, and he was like, "Why? why am I not BFFs with these people?" So I think some people would probably be just happy to just turn up, without actually getting anything for it. But I don't know. I just love that character. I think the interstitial novels are actually really good. I will save my comments on some of the other Star Wars things that I've read, but I do like those a lot.
And then I did have a question from the Book of Accidents. So to be honest, I'm about halfway through it. And
spoil anything?
It's weirder from there.
You haven't spoiled anything yet. Yeah, you actually have me more excited for how
there.
You have me more excited. Excellent. But I was hearing you talk a little bit and tell these lore stories and this folklore. So did you write yourself into the Book of Accidents a little bit? Is Jeb, the neighbor character, maybe a little reflective of you?
Oh, some people have said that they felt that way, but then some people think it's a reference to, is it Judd from Crandall, Judd Crandall from Pet Sematary. And he's not. He's actually he's an amalgamation of two of my actual neighbors, my dad's friends growing up. A guy named Jed and a guy named Walt. And I mashed them together into one person. And the writer thing is new. Neither of them were writers.
One tells stories, one drinks good booze, maybe.
Exactly. Yeah, there's definitely booze.
Yeah, that actually
one did tell good stories. That's actually true. Yeah.
Actually,
The whiskey I used for this drink was Writer's Tears. Several people picked that up on the photograph I posted.
Oh, there you go. There it is. Good Irish
I'm at the tears stage of my next book proposal, so.
I'm pretty much always at the tears stage of something. It's like always.
That may also be what being a writer is about.
I think it is. I think it's persistent tears. Yeah.
Persistent tears. Yeah. Well, I have to ask this question. What's next? I mean, I know Dustin Grimm is coming out, but what's next for you? What's on the horizon that you can tell us about?
Well, I do have the Wanderer sequel, Wayward.
Right.
And it's a very different book than Wanderers. I would argue it's less horror than Wanderers.
Okay.
I say that now without. I mean, we haven't edited, but it's just a very different book because the pandemic part of the book is kind of over, so it's some new problems. Mm-hmm. And then after that, I've got a book about apples, evil apples.
Evil apples.
Yeah.
Is this an adult book or is these like?
Oh yeah, an adult. Yes.
Okay. I in my head I envisioned apples with legs attacking.
Yeah, no, these are like I've got an apple thing, an heirloom apple thing, and so I'm gonna, as always, I'm a greedy, lazy writer, so I'm like gonna put all my apple knowledge into a book and make it scary.
I like it. No, that sounds great. That sounds great. I have to say, I tend to agree with Mike Breen's comment here that it is really interesting how it is both intimate and yet larger than life as well. And I know some apples that spread. Chuck and his apples.
I know.
But I will say that I think that sense of intimacy going large is I would say a feature of your work. I think that's something that you do really well.
Thank you.
And
that was a goal.
I think that's one of the reasons why I think we come back to you, really, is because, again, largely we do nonfiction on this show, but I make exceptions in some cases, and you're one, because I feel like there's a lot of reality and a lot of research that goes into this. And frankly, fiction does inspire nonfiction as well. The book that I wrote, Mr. Humble and Dr. Butcher, the doctor, this is nonfiction, performs a head transplant on primates in the 1970s, swaps a head and a body, and it works and it lives. And he was deeply influenced by Frankenstein, and in fact did not think Frankenstein was a cautionary tale in any way. And so I think that's a really good thing to know about. We have a couple people we're having to bust out, and so just thanking you for the chat. And also Marissa has to run away, but says great talk. This has been a joy to me. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Any last questions or comments from our folks? Any thank yous? Anything you want to add in so I can pop them up before people start vanishing from our ether? So now I say that, no one's going to say anything. Oh, there we go.
We're going, I'm out.
Yeah, we're gone. And I agree that taking it global, making it bigger, that's really great. I'm really loving it.
That's the goal.
And as always, thank you guys for coming. We have a show coming up that I think you will enjoy. We have Sam Keene next time. That's our last August show. And Sam Keene's book, The Ice Pick Surgeon, I just reviewed for Wall Street Journal, is disturbing in all sorts of ways. And we'll be talking about whether or not the ethics matter if you like the results. They do. So we'll have him on. And then later on in September, we're doing Judy Melanik, Working Stiff. And we'll also have a few other folks on. So please do join us. We're going to be talking about exploding teeth. You're going to love it. Her symbiotic fungus also wants to say goodbye. I just want to make sure that you knew that. We really appreciate it. All of your support really matters to us. Don't forget to also support Charming Disaster, who are the people who provided us with our great theme song, which we will close out with now. Thanks again, all of you, for being here and for being peculiar. If you're weird, your family.
You got the blue bottle blues when you wake up in the night. Don't make a big mistake, 'cause you can never make it right. When you reach out for the vial, feel the ridges in the glass. It's a matter of survival, baby, better watch your back. There is no